This is the Gigabyte Aero 17. It's been almost 7 months since I looked at an Aero laptop. In fact, the last one that I checked out was the Aero 15 OLED, and I didn't have the best experience with that in terms of functionality and performance, but that 4K display, OLED display, was absolutely gorgeous. It's still in my memory. Now this one over here comes with the new 10th gen Comet Lake processor and NVIDIA's RTX Supermax-Q graphics. But most importantly, I've got the 17-inch variant here, so I was naturally curious to see how it would cool the new hardware, and of course compare it to Intel's 9th gen Coffee Lake CPU and NVIDIA's non-Supermax-Q graphics, the standard one. Because if you think about it, or if you recall, both Intel and NVIDIA launched their CPUs and GPUs for notebooks at the exact same time. So, is this fresh hardware gonna give us any noticeable improvement over last generation? Let's find out. Oh, and by the way, I am gonna be comparing this to AMD's 4900HS. The results are surprising. Time to pay some bills. The X299 CLX from ASRock is the best place to house your new Core X processor. It features aluminum alloy heatsinks with Dr. Moss's 13-phase power design for the best overclocking experience. It also has Wi-Fi 6 support, 3 M.2 slots, along with reinforced PCI brackets. Learn more down below. Alright, so I want to quickly go over the specs of the Aero 17. The model that I have over here comes with a new Core i7-10875H, 8-core, 16-thread CPU, 16 gigabytes of dual channel memory running at 2933 MHz, a 512GB SSD, an RTX 2070 Super Max-Q GPU, and a 4K display. And the price you pay for all of that is $2,800. Now that's what Gigabyte told us, but their official site says $2,900, so take that for what it is. Now, of all the notebook brands that I've come across, Gigabyte is probably the only one offering a million SKUs of their Aero 15 and 17-inch notebooks. So you can pick this up from $1,700 all the way up to a whopping $4,300 USD. The notebook itself hasn't changed all that much. Think of this as a supersized Aero 15 with the same lid, the same backlit logo. Honestly, Gigabyte hasn't changed anything on the outside. The chassis, for the most part, is made out of CNC aluminum, but it's not an all unibody design like the Razer Blade, and the build quality is pretty good. The hinges have been stiffened up a bit. One of my biggest issues with last year's model was the wobbly screen, but I barely noticed that on this year's sample. When you open up the laptop, you're greeted with a full-size keyboard with pretty straightforward layout. Now, don't mistake yourselves thinking that this comes with front-facing speakers. That's not the case. They're just there for ventilation. In fact, the speakers are located at the bottom and they sound okay. I mean, there's no bass, there's a lot of treble. It's not the best sounding laptop speakers that I've come across. They haven't changed the sound signature compared to last generation, so nothing new here. The keyboard is really good. The typing experience is way superior compared to my Blade notebook. This is basically a copy and paste from last year's design. It's got good feedback, the RGB illumination is really nice and bright, but unfortunately it does not light up the function keys, and that can be a bit frustrating in the dark. I'm not a huge fan of the font choice, plus the WASD keys are bolded. It just kills the simplicity or the continuity of the whole notebook in my opinion. The trackpad is not that great. It's not a glass surface like what you can find on the Razer Blade series or even the G14 from ASUS, so it's not as smooth to navigate around with. Honestly, at this price point, I am disappointed to see Gigabyte not improvise on this area because you can get a better experience with the competition. I mean, sure, it does come with Windows precision drivers, but having good software doesn't necessarily mean a good experience if you have a really poor trackpad or something that doesn't meet up the standards, especially since you're paying close to $3,000 on a notebook. The trackpad does come with a fingerprint reader, so if that's something that you're looking into for added security, you've got that. But I do want to mention something very important, and that is the edges of the Aero series laptops are way too sharp to type on, especially when you're using it for general purposes. The webcam is positioned at the worst possible location. It's stationary, which means I can't, if I need to reposition my frame, I'd have to physically move the laptop and not the lid. Absolutely frustrating. It seems like Gigabyte is pretty adamant about their design choice here. And honestly, I don't get the point with bezel-less displays. I mean, what's wrong with having a little bit of space at the top to implement a camera? It just makes no sense. The microphone sounds okay. I mean, it's passable, but honestly, I wouldn't use this for business conference calls just because it's not your best angle. It's pointing at your nose, and you don't want people looking at your nose for the most part. So yeah, I'm pretty frustrated, honestly. Gigabyte, like, Why? Now, you may or may not have noticed coil whine in that recording, and the reason I say that is because during idle scenarios, in some cases, this notebook started to exhibit really bad coil whine. I mean, listen to this. So yeah, that's something to be aware of. We did confirm with a few other creators who have the exact same sample. They seem to experience the same issue too. So this might turn out to be a known issue for the new Aero notebooks. But after speaking to Gigabyte about this issue, they did mention that you can exchange or RMA the notebook if you are experiencing the same thing. The I/O is loaded on this notebook. In fact, it's one of my favorite things about the Aero series. So on the right-hand side, there's power in, HDMI 2.0, mini DisplayPort 1.4, Thunderbolt 3, a Type A USB 3.2 Gen 1. Switching over to the left, you get an RJ45 jack, UHS 2 card reader, a couple more USB Type A ports, and audio jacks. It's basically a content creator's dream come true. However, I can't seem to wrap my head around Gigabyte's implementation of USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is the 5 gigabits per second protocol, versus Gen 2, that's 10 gigabits per second protocol, because that was supported on Coffee Lake CPUs. So I'm not sure why they haven't updated the I/O spec to that. I mean, my Razer Blade with the 9th gen CPU has that. So it's kind of frustrating to see Gigabyte not update the specs. Moving on to the display, this is by far the best that I've encountered on a notebook, guys. Heck, even better than a gaming monitor. You see, the model that I have here comes with a 4K resolution at 60 Hz, and it's pre-calibrated by X-Rite out of the factory, and Gigabyte claims up to 100% Adobe RGB. That's never heard of on a notebook, at least I haven't experienced one in the past. Now, this thing surpassed our display quality analysis test with flying colors. Honestly, I didn't even think about running the display tests in the first place because when I opened up the laptop for the first time, I was drooling all over it, guys. The colors are just beautiful with consistent contrast ratios at different brightness levels. The screen gets really bright, close to 500 nits, so you can easily take this thing outdoors. Plus, it's matte. I mean, what else can you ask for? You can count on this display for some serious color work, or even if you're a photographer, this is what you should be looking into. The 4K resolution scales really well on the 17-inch form factor. It's really, really sharp. I honestly can't complain about it at all. Now, if you are thinking about gaming on it primarily, I would step down to the 1080p 144 Hz display because yes, 4K is great for content creation, but not necessarily for gaming. So that's something to keep note of. Now, in terms of upgradability, you get instant access to 2 RAM slots and you can upgrade memory up to 64 gigabytes. There are 2 M.2 slots, of which one of them is populated and it has really good read-write performance. The battery on this thing is huge, guys. It's 94 watt hours, which is a little less than the actual legal limit, which is about 99.9 watt hours, and it's really good on this laptop. During our light load test, refreshing a Chrome webpage for 15 seconds, our system lasted over 7 hours. During our heavy load test, running Realbench on a loop, the system lasted for about 1 hour and 40 minutes. Finally, let's get into performance. Now, Gigabyte has added various performance modes on the Aero 17. You can easily access them through their control center. We ran all of our tests in the highest setting. Starting with synthetics, the new 8-core 16-thread Core i7-10875H is a good 35 to 40% faster than the 6-core 12-thread 9750H. Now, keep in mind, I'm comparing this to the Razer Blade Pro, which is another slim gaming laptop just like the Aero 17, whereas the Legion Y740 was a brick running at crazy high clock speeds. Single core performance has improved, and that kind of makes sense since this laptop didn't have a problem maintaining clock speeds at 4.5 to 4.8 gigahertz, but under heavy multi-core workload, clock speeds dipped all the way down to 3 to 3.2 gigahertz. And the results were, well, respectable, but not great, especially when compared to the Ryzen 9 4900HS. As you can see from our Blender test, it just can't quite keep up with AMD. The same story applies to our Handbrake test transcoding a video. That 4900HS is wicked fast, guys. Now, about this WinRAR test, a lot of this has to do with the SSD speeds along with single-threaded performance, and the Aero 17 does really well. That Y740 from Lenovo has one of the fastest SSDs, and it's clocked really high, so that's why it takes the lead here. Moving on to Adobe Premiere, this thing certainly favors Intel, and that's thanks to QuickSync, but there is no difference whatsoever compared to the 9750H, even with 4 extra threads on the new CPU. I think this might be an optimization thing, but if you really think about it, it's the same architecture, so yeah. Switching to DaVinci Resolve, I think the RTX 2070 Super deserves the credit here since it's got more cores, and this program loves GPUs, so there's barely any effort put by the new Intel CPU. Gaming performance, on the other hand, was outstanding. That new RTX 2070 Super Max-Q is noticeably faster than the non-Super variant, and it almost reaches RTX 2080 Max-Q levels. We ran all of our tests in 1080p set to the high settings. Keep in mind, if gaming is your priority, I'd get that 1080p 144Hz display for the best, smooth, fast, and fluid experience. Temperatures are really good, and I expected that for a 17-inch notebook. So on the CPU, it initially spikes to 80C when clock speeds boost to 4.8 GHz, but over time it averages to about 63C, but keep in mind that clock speeds do take a hit. Even with really good internal temperatures, the surface temps were quite high, especially at the bottom during gaming workloads. So I wouldn't put this thing on my lap for any of those GPU or CPU intensive workloads. The acoustic performance on the Aero series was actually pretty impressive. Now, during idle, mind you, the system is pretty much dead silent, but there is that coil whine issue that I talked about earlier. That's something to be aware of. During heavy load scenarios, it's actually not that bad. It doesn't sound like a jet fan, so that's nice. So to conclude, let's go over some of the pros of the Aero 17. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that display. It's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's one of the main highlights of this laptop. The colors are just beautiful. It's color accurate. If you're a content creator, colorist, or if you're a photographer, this is what you should be looking into. The performance differences or the performance improvements are respectable. I mean, if I were to be completely transparent, if you're someone who's using a program that takes advantage of multi-core workload, you will notice a difference with that extra 4 threads. But if you're using DaVinci Resolve or if you're a Premiere editor, there's absolutely no reason to upgrade to the new Tension CPUs because there's no difference whatsoever, as you saw by those results. Now, the RTX 2070 Super is really fast. It actually reaches RTX 2080 Max-Q level. So I can't wait to see what the RTX 2080 Super Max-Q can offer. I think that's something that I really want to get my hands on. But what's really interesting is that I never saw this laptop hit 5.1 gigahertz according to Intel's marketing slides when they officially launched these processors, because the CPU technically can achieve 5.1, but I never saw clock speeds hit that. But here's a $1 million question. Would I spend $2,800 on this laptop? And the answer to that is a simple no, because there are far more negatives with this laptop than the pros that I talked about earlier. The first thing is obviously the design. It's way too sharp, super uncomfortable to type on or just generally use. I just feel like Gigabyte should have refined the design a little bit, but they just didn't do that. The trackpad is really, really bad. I really wish if they, were able to offer something the Blade series are able to offer with a glass surface, but that's not the case, especially since you're spending this kind of money. Webcam, worst possible location. I mean, it's just pointless. I wouldn't even use it. Lastly, there is the I/O. I really wish that Gigabyte, it's really weird to see them go with USB 3.2 Gen 1 instead of Gen 2. It's not up to spec, even though you can pick up a 9th-gen processor on an older laptop with the updated spec, so that's really weird. So yeah, overall, I don't know, I can't recommend this laptop. It's just, while the display is great, the rest of it just fails to meet the expectations for the price point. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some relevant content over here. I hope you guys are staying safe and sound. Stay safe, guys. Spend responsibly. I'll talk to you guys in the next one, guys. Peace.